So, GDP per capita and ID receptivity are highly correlated, though the figures aren't absolute. There are notable exceptions within this data, as you can see by a couple of the outliers, and those are predominantly in the MENA countries. There is also a strong correlation with community attachment and receptivity to people with intellectual disabilities. This raises an incredibly interesting question about social capital. Is it an indication of the blurring of lines of the people regarding people with ID no longer as them, but bringing them into the us camp? I'd like to find the panelists' insights in relation to that. So, the patron saint of Gallup is a chap named Lord Kelvin. He once stated, "If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it." So hopefully this data is going to provide a platform from which to engage those global leaders, so you can really start to drive those figures forward. So regionally, acceptance ranges from a high of 82% in North America to a low of 42% in South Asia. Once again, I'd like to note that all the figures here are global median averages, with the world median average being 55%. So, let's look at the country data. The country data will allow us to celebrate the successes that we have within communities and also learn from some of those best practices. I'd like to just note that the data is instructive rather than definitive. We recognise that by the fact that it's only a single question and not a series of questions, it does have its limitations. Nonetheless, the data does circumvent some of the difficulties around data gathering on this very sensitive topic. And it is nonetheless self-reported against people's own perceptions of whether the area they live is a good place for people with ID. Regionally, we see a gulf exists between countries with the highest levels of receptivity versus those with the lowest. For convenience and time, I've had to aggregate a couple of areas which wouldn't normally be aggregated, i.e. the Americas. So this is a little bit of a whirlwind tour of the data, but as mentioned, the data is available on our website from today. So, the European Union scores very, very highly. We see a high of 91% in the Netherlands to a low of 52% in Bulgaria. Looking across all the countries, out of the 25 countries surveyed in the region, 19 scored over 70%, which is very high. But all bar Romania scored over the global median average. Within Asia, residents have mixed levels of receptivity. Within New Zealand, it's 90%, and Malaysia's a low of 26%. Out of the 19 countries surveyed, only 9 were above the median global average of 55%. Although we're using the global median average as a shorthand, just as a benchmark with which to anchor the data, the fact that it's as low as 55% is worrying in itself. In MENA, residents score among the lowest globally, with a high in Syria of 79% and a low of 24% in Yemen. Eight out of the 16 countries score at the median or above. Nonetheless, this is slightly misleading, as 4 of the countries are clustered at the 55% mark. This region also contains 2 of the worst performing globally, namely Yemen at 24% and the Palestinian territories at 25%. The Commonwealth of Independent States score amongst the lowest, as demonstrated by the low range of 56% in Belarus and 32% in Kyrgyzstan. This poor performance is reflected by the fact that in the CIS, 8 out of the 10 countries are below the median average. All score below 57%. Turning to sub-Saharan Africa, the picture is actually relatively more positive. In Mali, it's 74% high and 32% low in Cameroon. Sub-Saharan Africa scores comparatively well. Out of the 20 countries, half are above the global median average. Residents of the Americas also have mixed levels of receptivity. When the artificial group of the Americas is used, including the Caribbean, we see a very, very large range, from 86% in Canada to 38% in Haiti. Globally, the Americas score well comparatively against the other regions. There's only 4 countries there which are below the median out of 21 countries. And there's only 2 that score below 50%. So, number of conclusions. First of all, in relation to education and income. Residents with higher education and/or higher income, by the fact they hang so closely together, are most likely to judge their areas as receptive to people with intellectual disabilities. Gallup found the largest increase in receptivity from the elementary or less to the secondary education bracket, with only small gains for further education. We see that there's a high correlation between acceptance of other minority groups and acceptance of people with intellectual disabilities. People in countries with higher community attachment are more likely to say that where they live is a good place for people with intellectual disabilities. We saw no meaningful differences in receptivity once you control for education and income, for age and gender. We've also seen a broad range of receptivity across countries and regions, with highs in North America, Northern Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. We've also seen a strong correlation between that GDP per capita as a general rule of thumb, with strong exceptions in relation to some of the MENA countries. So, in relation to 2 of these points, the other minority groups point and the community attachment findings, there are very interesting questions in relation to the impact of social capital upon receptivity, which we'd absolutely love to explore further. So, if I can be so kind to introduce the panel members and hear their take on this. Thank you. Thank you very much.